Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Erpelding. I'm the Vice President of Government and Community Relations for the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. And we are excited today to have our first legislative update featuring the leaders of the House and the Senate. In a few moments, I'll introduce our guests. But before we get there, a couple things. First, the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce is Idaho's only five-star accredited member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And our membership has been what has made this possible. Our ability to convert to virtual programming during the pandemic has been because of folks who are willing to invest in the chamber and recognize that the programming that we put on is educational and valuable to our community. Today's sponsors are Optum and Brightbank, and they continue to be incredible partners for us. They continue to be committed to advancing quality policy and having civil dialogue around issues that matter. Additionally, I want to point out that this year, for the first time, we have two media partners for this event. We have the Idaho Statesman and we have Idaho Ed News. The ending result there is that we have more opportunities for people to be able to see what we offer and to see that civil dialogue in politics is important. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest today, starting with our Speaker Pro Tem, Scott Bedke, who's got here just in time, and House Minority Leader, Representative Ilana Rubel, who is an old friend and someone who I served with for years. And then on the Senate side, we have Senate Pro Tem Senator Chuck Winder and Senate Minority Leader Michelle Stennett. To the four of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for having this conversation online instead of in person in the Rev and Tax room. But before we get to questions, really quick, starting with you, Speaker Bedke, how's everything going, and how's your caucus?
Ever the provocateur. Everything's going fine. What would lead you to believe that it wouldn't be as it always is? And anyway, yeah, there's angst, there's frustration. It built up all summer long. We're now in session, and we're going to and we're addressing things one at a time. I think that we need to be somewhat deliberative as we do that. Whatever changes we make to statute need to be done in a way that that works. And I've been encouraging my colleagues to take the fact sets from previous disasters and put them into the new constructs to see if everything still works. And hopefully that continues to happen, etc. But I don't think that the Idaho House of Representatives is going to lie down for changes. I think that three things stand out. The changes that were made to the election process by having to tap the Cold War era written statute 46601 in the continuity of government, and to use the power that is given there to the executive branch I don't think that it wasn't meant to be used to change the way we do carry out elections, etc. Anyway, I could go on. You asked me how things are in the House. They're about like they were when you were there, Matt.
Got it. Representative Rubel, a quick check-in, just a quick check-in. How's your caucus doing? A quick one.
Well, as always, we make all these plans about all these wonderful affirmative pieces of legislation we're going to bring, and then the curveballs start coming, and then we find ourselves, responding to all of the things that we didn't plan that are out of our hands. So we're in that mode now, and of course, we're just dealing with the facts of legislating in this bizarre pandemic time, and trying to ensure there's a safe workplace for everybody, and of course all of the tensions that everyone's heard about that go into that. But we're looking forward to moving on to meaty legislation.
Great. President Pro Tem Winder, a quick keyword check-in on your caucus. How's everything going?
It's going great. Thanks, Matt.
Perfect. Senator Stennett?
Same. We're doing the work people each, going great, as anticipated.
Perfect. So today's a little different. We've got, for those that have watched these events, we have 5 people on this. So the way we manage the screen will be a little bit different. Each question is going to go to 2 members of this panel, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and then kind of assorted by House and Senate. So it's not going to be traditionally just a down the line. The first question that I have is actually for Speaker Bedke and President Pro Tem Winder. You know, because of the budget, the governor's decision to have a 1% holdback last year, because of the decision for the regulation reductions, the red tape reduction, which largely was writing rules so humans can understand them and not having thousands of pages of defunct rules, and with some luck, Idaho's financial situation is in a pretty good place. So the many chamber members are wondering why it appears that the majority's agenda this session is currently ire directed at the governor and that power. So I'm going to leave it to the 2 of you to kind of explain that. You got a couple minutes, and then I'll come back in.
Well, I need to start first or I won't get any time. So see if that puts a smile on Scott's face or not. Matt, thanks for starting with a nice softball question. You know, we do want to get to tax relief. We do want to get to funding of schools. Do want to get to transportation funding and the issues that are important to the business community. I can't speak for everyone in the Senate, but I believe there's a widespread opinion that while the governor may have managed the COVID-19 within the boundaries of the current code, that the legislature did not play the role that it was constitutionally required to do in allocating of funds, extending emergencies and those types of things. And so just remember, this is a different one. This is a long-term one. It's still going on. We're still in stage 2. We still got lots of restrictions. We've still got people going out of business. Unemployment's twice as high as it was a year ago.
Unmute here. What was the question, Matt?
You know, the question is, here you have a state that is financially in a great place. We've been recognized for having reformed our rules process and cleaned up our rules so that citizens can utilize them and understand them. We're in the black. We're one of the few states that has a massive surplus. And the first part of this session appears to be ire from the legislature directed at the governor, a member of your own party.
Well, the success that Idaho is experiencing now financially is a credit to Idahoans, and primarily, and maybe secondarily is the tax, you know, is the positive business climate that we have worked diligently to prepare or to construct. Obviously, the governor, this governor, the other governor, you know, former governors, members of both the House and the Senate, both parties have been responsible for creating the good atmosphere that we have here in Idaho. And since we're, you know, prosperous, and since there is the type of surplus that you know, north of $600 million, you know, why aren't we happy? And I think that we are happy mostly. It's except for the fact that we've had, you know, we had laws sitting on the books for decades. They were never stress tested until this summer, and they come out, you know, at least in the majority's opinion, they come up lacking. Now, and so so we're going to be about setting some of those things straight. I don't think that we ought to have to go to a continuity of government, you know, an Armageddon type situation, nuclear blast type situation, where, you know, when, if we're going to change the way we, you know, conduct elections. I don't think that that we should non-cog $1.3 billion. I don't think that that disaster declarations should be able to be re-upped every 30 days ad infinitum. And those are the three things that I think that we're going to take a look at. And so that's what you have in front of you here. And I think anybody that enjoys a system of checks and balances ought to identify with those three things that I just brought up.
Fair enough. The next question I have is for Representative Rubel and Representative Stennett. Representative Rubel and Stennett, it's no secret the Democrats had a bad election cycle. The House minority is a little bit smaller. And when you're operating in a minority that small, what are you doing to influence the legislature and have an impact on the legislative process this year? I'll start with you, Senator Stennett.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I would beg to differ because much went according to what I had hoped for, and so we have new administrations in the federal level. In my district, the 3 Democrats, 2 House members and myself did win. We had wins at the local level. And then I retained the members in the Senate that I had historically. I would prefer to have a little bit more balance, of course, but I would disagree that I think for at least my area and on the Senate side, we have fared well. But to answer your question, it's as it always is. We are here to defend and speak to the things that are of interest and concern to the people who we represent. They deserve to have a voice and a presence in the building and in negotiating the policies that impact them, just like every other year and always. And it is up to the legislature to hear everybody, because once we're elected officials, we represent everyone. We represent our Republicans, Independents, Democrats, everyone. And so disenfranchising or marginalizing any one of us, 105 people in the building, does a disservice to all of our constituents. And so therefore, we feel very strongly about promoting good policy, and we always do bring good policy that hopefully brings the greatest amount of recovery, relief, and economic productivity to our families and to our workers. So that does not change.
All right. Well, I echo much of what Senator Stennett said. We do speak for actually a large number of Idahoans. While in the House, we may have 17% of the seats. We know consistently through statewide elections that about 40% of Idahoans vote consistently Democratic. And so we need to be their voice. And I think on a lot of issues, actually, the Democrats speak for a substantial majority of Idahoans. For example, the Democrats in the House were consistently the champions of expanding Medicaid, which we know 61% of Idahoans supported. And so, we certainly will continue to be the voice for ensuring quality, affordable healthcare access for everybody. We have a lot of proposals that I think actually correlate well with what most Idahoans want. We are less concerned about power struggles between the legislature and the governor. I think our main objective is to just get through COVID as quickly and effectively and with as little loss of life and loss of jobs and loss of business as possible. In our view, that means using all the resources at our command, including National Guard resources, including FEMA funds. So we'll certainly be pushing to ensure that we have the resources we need to minimize the impact of the pandemic and get back to normal as quickly as possible. But other things, proactively, we have a lot on our agenda. We want to address property tax and get property taxes cut in a manner that leaves critical resources intact at the local government level. I'm always very interested in criminal justice reform and having a more sensible system that costs less. We would like to do some really tangible things that would help kids and families, like looking at extending foster care at people's option that have adopted it. Looking at early childhood education and maybe opening up to school districts the possibility of using funds down to age 4. Looking at, I know there's a lot of talk about tax cuts. First of all, we'd like to address infrastructure needs and education needs before we look at that. But if there are going to be income tax cuts, we'd like to see them go to the people who need them, instead of just historically, they've only ever looked at top margin tax cuts where all the money comes home to roost on those top 10%. We'd like to look at tax cuts for those who are working folk who really need the money. So those are some of the things on our agenda.
That's great. I'm going to bring in our other two, and this question is for Representative Rubel and Senator Winder. Representative Rubel and Senator Winder, you two both are well aware of the property tax challenges that we've had across the state, and in particular in areas where there's high levels of growth. So the Treasure Valley, the Kootenai Valley, that whole area up north, and then some areas out east. Last year, there were a flurry of bills, all of which basically went nowhere. Does the legislature have an appetite to actually deal with the problems associated with property tax, like somehow addressing the homeowners exemption and the rapid inflation of residential homes, maybe some really modest ways to impact city and local jurisdictions' budgets? Is there a way to build a compromise package that everybody can get something, or is it going to be like it has been historically? And I'll start with you, Pro Tem Winder.
Thanks, Matt. I believe that the House has jealously guarded their constitutional control of revenue and tax. And last year, when they sent over, and I think it was House Bill 101, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was basically what the Senate thought was more penalizing to local governments by putting caps on their revenues, and it really impacts. That bill impacted areas that were growing fast, and we know that we're short of funds in Ada County and probably Canyon County, probably up in Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls area, probably Twin Falls. Idaho Falls is growing like crazy too. So the Senate didn't want to penalize local government, but also part of guarding that House right to control the revenue, we actually did pass a change in the homeowners exemption and in the circuit breaker for the lowest income people in Idaho, thinking that actually was some tax relief. It didn't deal necessarily with the shift that might occur because of taking funds from one pot and putting it in another. But I think what we're trying to do this year is get a comprehensive look at property tax, income tax, corporate tax, grocery tax is being talked about. So I think there is going to be a more comprehensive look. And I'm assuming it's going to end up being kind of a hybrid combination of things, that it won't just be one type of tax relief or tax change that will come out of both the House and the Senate.
So I actually appreciate much of the Senate's approach to the property tax question. I think one of the things that got us hung up before is I think everybody wants property tax cuts, but certainly speaking from the House Democrat side of things, and I think in large part on the Senate side's concerns, is we need to do it in a way that doesn't kneecap local governments. And I think there are a lot of avenues to do that, but we can't get behind something that just takes money out of the pockets of county and city governments. They are already really operating on a bare bones situation. They have a lot of things they're mandated to do, and they barely have the resources to do it as it is. So I think we need to look at some of the ways in which we have actually been denying local governments the funding that they're entitled to or should be entitled to, which is in turn forcing them to jack up property taxes. For example, internet sales tax. So normally if you buy a shirt at a brick and mortar store, a portion of that sales tax is going to go to local government to help them cover local government needs. And then the remainder goes to the general fund where it covers education. We have been sequestering all of those funds, and that's the biggest growing pot of sales tax dollars. And none of that is going to local government, and none of that is going to education. So our local government needs and education have been left with this dwindling pot of sales tax dollars from brick and mortar sales and completely denied access to internet sales tax dollars. If we were to use those internet sales tax dollars and just treat them like regular sales tax, that would relieve a huge amount of the pressure on local government and schools, which would save property taxpayers a lot of money. It would reduce the need for levies and for the need to raise people's property taxes to cover local government needs. So that's an easy fix that would not defund local governments and not jeopardize our ability to pay first responders. I totally support the Senate's effort to raise the circuit breaker. Would love to see that happen. I would love to see us restore the indexed homeowners exemption, which is, these are all avenues of giving property tax relief that would leave services whole and would allow us to continue. Last session, there were some efforts on the House Republican side that would have cut tens of millions of dollars from pandemic response efforts, from paramedics, from local district health boards. We just didn't see that was the direction to go in. But I really think there's room for agreement in ways that leave local government whole.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's complex, and it is going to require collaboration and some compromise on every level. My next question is, let's move to education. And Senator Stennett and Speaker Bedke, this question is for you. The governor's recommended a 3.7% increase in our funding for public education. And can you speak a little bit to the funding model? What do you support? What concerns do you have? And when you look into your crystal ball, what do you see happening? Senator Stennett.
Thank you, Matt. It is an extraordinary time for education, and unfortunately, no matter who looks at it, it is going to be difficult to redirect what all the extraordinary effort that schools and teachers are doing and students in a pandemic. And so, unfortunately, many would agree that it isn't going as smoothly as one would hope, and also that it is very difficult to read whether the kids are meeting any kind of standards in the last year or so through an academic year and a half. And so part of that, I think we realized, is understanding that we don't have an equal system across the state, that broadband was uneven, that the ability to provide devices if you have to go remote certainly wasn't even across the states and amongst families. And therefore, those are things that the state has to take into consideration. Some of the stuff that we do need to that we have been talking about for years and years is improving broadband. And that's not only for schools, but that's also for our industry, for us to be able to be competitive. And of course, everything we do in our school system is in the hopes that we prepare our students for being an educated, skilled workforce. For a good education brings better jobs and better employment and wages. And so a lot has suffered or could suffer if we don't really invest at this particularly critical time in the education system. So I totally am supportive of anything that we can do to backfill and support the schools going forward, and trying to get them to get through this academic year, and make sure that we're supporting our teachers in a fashion that we've promised, and make sure that communities understand that however it's rolled out as far as the pandemic, of whether you're remote or not, or part in a hybrid, that everybody's trying to do the best that they can, and it isn't a perfect science. And we're all working at something that none of us have ever had control over before. So I support what the governor will put in. I'm grateful that some COVID dollars went to the schools to backfill so that they were better prepared for this academic year. I think we have much more work ahead in order to be competitive.
There's a lot of things that we don't know going forward, but there are a list of things that we do know. Number one, every classroom has got to have a good teacher, maybe more important in a hybrid delivery system than it's ever been before. So I think it's incumbent upon us to stay the course on our career ladder and the way we pay teachers, the way we incentivize teachers, the way we incentivize college graduates to come into teaching. I think that is still very important. We put a lot of emphasis in the past on literacy, and it would be a shame if we have given some of that progress back during this, since last March. I'm concerned that we have. I'm concerned, as Senator Stennett brought up, the unequal ability to deliver education in a hybrid manner. That it's not every place in the state is created equal, but I mean, we here at the Capitol, I mean, when we were trying to watch the State of the State address, I mean, much of the time it was buffering, and I could only imagine how frustrating that would be for trying to teach, little kids or any kid, anybody. It was frustrating for me just to sit in there and watch the thing twirl and it buffer. But it would be very frustrating if I'm at home during that time as a parent. That has created stress on my job, and I'm there to to assist the kids in their learning, and the technology is not working. That would be very frustrating. Hopefully it's not as bad as I described and that it is working, but I'm sure that every parent has a horror story or an anecdotal story that we could talk about. But like I said, I think the governor's proposal is in good shape. And I think we need to continue the career ladder, and because like I say, of all the things we don't understand, the one thing we do understand is that every classroom needs a great teacher in it, and you only get that by paying people what they need and supplying them with the stuff that they need to deliver the education. So anyway, I don't think his proposal will run into problems, and I believe that it's a good proposal.
So building off of that, this question is for the senators. Senator Stennett and Winder, there's been a bunch of discussions around who has the right to close a school down. And this is particularly important with regard to how our health districts work. Historically, health districts have been responsible for maintaining infectious disease outbreaks, often that occur in high schools. So measles, mumps, a meningitis outbreak. And right now there's a debate over who has school authority, who has school closure authority, and how are those policies looking to change? I'll start with you, Senator Winder.
Thanks, Matt. And that is a difficult question. I believe that the Senate believes that one size doesn't fit all, and we encourage the governor to look to local control and move it down to the school district level to make those decisions. Unfortunately, I think you're right. There is confusion in our code as to who can do what. Also, the other issue, and we experienced it in the school district that I reside in, which is West Ada, the school's largest and per student the least funded school districts, that they really tried to deal with all of this. They tried to figure out a way to move forward in hybrid fashion. There was tremendous turmoil from parents in the community, and we had school board members resign and leave, and chairman stepped down, and so what you learn out of that is that maybe the school board isn't really prepared to make those kind of decisions. Maybe they don't have the support system or the recommending system that advises them on making decisions, how to get there. So I think there's some work that needs to be done there again, and before we expect our school districts to be able to make those decisions. While other school districts did just fine, most of the schools in the state are operating at full capacity and moving their students through. But probably when you start looking at the large districts like Boise and West Ada and some of the others, those kids are in danger of being left behind because of the way it's being delivered.
Senator Stennett.
Well, it's interesting because when school started, I have a very large district with a lot of school districts and a lot of schools in them of various varieties. And our smaller schools ended up having an explosion of COVID cases right after they opened. And so it was something we would have expected in our bigger population schools, but ended up manifesting itself pretty early on in our smaller, our less populated schools. So it put everything on the skids of how each school and each school district thought would be the best, safest way to go forward in an academic year. And it certainly hasn't been a perfect science. That said, the committee I was in just before we came to this panel is Health and Welfare, and we were having a presentation by the public health districts, and they made it very clear that they did not ever make some kind of proclamation to close schools. They advised, and they were advised by Health and Welfare and the CDC and other entities. In the end, as Senator Winder mentioned, they are comprised of commissioners or commissioners who appoint other people to sit in on these boards, who are the governing body that tells each of the public health districts how to operate. And so that local control that was given to them manifested itself very differently across the state. And in some cases, there is no obligation for a healthcare provider, and in some cases, not even a physician, to be on that board if one is not made available. And so this is difficult for a health district who doesn't have any health representation to be able to cope in the kind of pandemic situation that we have been through. So that complicated how they advised anybody under their jurisdiction, including school districts, how they thought they should best roll out their academic year. So I think it's really shown perhaps something that we could help work on, even though understanding that health districts have their own independence and autonomy and are not ruled by the governor or by state government, though there are overlaps, and those have been not readily understood by many in the legislature and also the public, which I think better public education will help people understand what is, whose jurisdiction is where. I think that got fairly blended and there's a lot of confusion on it. But in the end, it was deemed that each school district, just like each city and county, have a certain degree of power and authority over how something that deals with public health, they have the authority to do and take action.
You know, we're going to continue on with a couple more education questions, and then we're going to get to transportation and infrastructure for those that are watching. This question is for my former housemates, Representative Rubel and Speaker Bedke. The concern, and Speaker, you spoke to this, is this year we believe that many students are being left behind. And they're being left behind because of a lack of access to broadband internet when they're stuck at home, or they have not enough supervision when they're supposed to be learning. Who knows what the reason is? Students are getting left behind. What is the legislature doing, or at least looking at, to ensure that those that are getting left behind are caught up in the next year so it doesn't become something that is systemic or endemic by the time they graduate from high school? And I'll start with Representative Rubel.
Okay, well, you know, I think this has just been a terrible year for education, and I don't blame our educators at all. It's just a lousy setup for anybody to have to proceed in. And I speak as a mother of 4 kids, and I admire our teachers to the skies. They have moved mountains to try to make this a good experience, but I still feel like it's just largely been a lost year, both in terms of social development and academic development. There's just nothing comparable about being remote to being in a classroom. And I think it's going to be a real setback in terms of meeting all the targets. I think our kids are going to be missing reading targets and math targets and all kinds of things, and we're going to be dealing with this for a long time. Things that we need, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical that we make good on the career ladder, because teachers, not just now, but going for a while, are going to have unprecedented challenges as they face kids that are behind the metrics they need to be at. I think, you know, making sure that we're adequately funding our higher education institutions is also going to be really critical. But I think we also need to be looking at things like counselors. So in the middle of all this, our go-on rate dropped to an unprecedentedly low level We were at 38%, which is awful. I was on the governor's task force on higher education a few years ago when we were trying to figure out how to get to 60%, which is what we determined we need for workforce development. And instead of going up, we dropped precipitously to 38%, which is absolutely dismal. But I think even worse than that, I think a lot of those kids who do go on are going to be underprepared. And I think education institutions are going to be dealing with remediation. So I think there are just going to be needs at every level, and not just in the teaching professions, but as I said, in those other support roles, such as counseling and other areas, to support these kids that have largely lost a year at a very critical time when their brains are forming and we needed them to be going full steam ahead. We are investing in better broadband, so I think that'll maybe address some of the technical barriers. But I think even for those kids that were able to get perfect broadband access, they're going to have big setbacks educationally that we need to address.
Mr. Speaker, I want to drill down on that because all of the things that Representative Rubel mentioned are critical. But if some of these kids that are in first, second, and third grade that are falling behind don't get that remediation until we've invested in them in higher ed, then all is lost. So really the question I have for you is the legislature taking dramatic steps right now to focus on the necessary remediation that everyone knows is coming?
Well, the legislature never takes dramatic steps anywhere. But as a grandfather of 14 grandkids, I have 4 7-year-old boys, grandsons that are all in first grade someplace, and just the difference between the delivery between on all in Idaho and all in public schools, and just the difference in the delivery to those little boys is concerning to me. I don't know that Ilana talked about taking the year off, and that that's a year they're never going to get back, and all the things that they may lose. That's definitely a concern to me. That's a concern as a father to both to my kids that have these 14 kids, as I have communicated to them that we can't afford to let these kids take a year off, and that if it's lax at school, the family's going to have to step up and make sure that they're reading and that they can do their math, etc. And then I hear myself saying that, and I know that there are other situations out there where there's not a secondary or an ancillary support system, or actually it should be the primary support system of the family, but it does not exist. It's not there, and that concerns me greatly. I don't think that we're making dramatic steps there. I think that we will have to, evaluate and to see where we're at. But if we wanted to do more right now with the system that we have, we couldn't do it, even if we knew what we don't, which dial do I turn, Matt? I mean, that's a concern. You're not going to, in your family, and you're not going to leave it to chance. You're going to make sure that I won't get personal here, but we're not going to take chances with our kids here, but we are of the lucky ones, and there is a support system here. And the go on rate dropping to 38, I appreciate the adjectives that Representative Rubel used, and I agree with them. I mean, we've had one big snow day here, and it's not.
It's problematic.
It's problematic, I guess, is a nice way to put it. And so you point me in the right direction. I will help and use whatever influence I have to address this, because it is absolutely critical. The K-3 literacy is the indicator of success from that point on. And but is it not working? We have a feeling that it is. Anecdotally, we have these stories, But how bad is it? What would we do in a hybrid delivery system if it wasn't working? Where do you want us to spend the money on? I think these are unanswered questions that deserve to be answered. And if this was our normal going forward, where there'll always be some type of hybrid, I hope that it is not. But if it is, we've got to pivot as a education system and do something a little different.
Well, if there's one thing that COVID has exposed, it's the flaws in the online education system, which has value, but certainly there does need to be some really looking at how you make it as quality as possible. One more education question, and this one I've got in there for Senator Winder and Representative Rubel. And I'm going to start with you, Senator Winder. Last year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the Blaine Amendment, ultimately striking that down, which was an amendment in many state constitutions. It has anti-religion and all kinds of negative connotations with it, but ultimately its outcome was it made it so that state dollars couldn't be used for parochial schooling. With the Supreme Court's ruling, it opens the door to a host of things, namely school vouchers in Idaho or money flowing into private schools, religious schools, etc. For both of you, do you see us going down that road this year in light of all of our funding difficulties on the public side, and what will that look like?
Thanks, Matt. Yes, there are a lot of proposals out there floating around, and they do include everything from vouchers to savings accounts where public money would be given under controlled circumstances directly to a student through a savings account that the state actually establishes to help them with educational choice. So we've got all these things going on. We've seen what's happened with COVID, the impact on the brick and mortar schools, which are really part of the governor's stay healthy orders. So we're providing that direction to our students and our teachers to do remote, to do hybrid, to do things that really appear to be pretty detrimental to our students. And I've got two twin grandsons that are in the 6th grade. They're both hybrid system. They both have access to laptops and internet, but they're struggling. They're struggling with the social issues. They miss their friends. They miss the interaction with their teacher and all the things that kind of go along with school. So maybe they're not as motivated. They're good students. They've always done well, but I think this is impacting them. And I think even going back to the interim committee we did a few years ago, we were trying to figure out a way to recognize that education is being delivered in different ways and that we need to have funding follow the students more. We didn't get there, but I still think this even brought it more to a head of how do you deliver education under these kind of circumstances. For instance, an example, I think the governor did a great job with his grants to help the Idaho family with their needs for technology in their home, with actual tools to help them, particularly for those people that didn't have any. So I think there are some things that we can do, but we're going to have to put more money into it. I understand with the COVID money and everything that went into education, it was about a 16% increase. And now we're talking about 3.7, but there's tremendous pressure on our teachers and on our school system. My wife was a teacher. My daughter's a principal. I hear about their just daily challenges of getting their kids educated, keeping their teachers healthy, keeping their staff healthy. It's not an easy time, and money's part of it, but it's not the only answer.
Representative Rubel.
Okay, remind me the question again.
I'll come from
the
question is largely about with the Blaine Amendment being struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. Are we going to see vouchers, ed savings accounts? What are we looking at this year?
Well, we'll have to see what those proposals look like. But anything that looks like taking money out of the public school budget to subsidize folks who want to send their kids to private school, personally, I'm going to have a big problem with. We're already 51st in America on funding public schools, and the notion of taking tens or hundreds of millions of dollars out to, kick in for people who want to send their kids to private schools, I think would leave our public schools in a really catastrophic spot. So if the legislature wants to dump a bunch of new money in for people to take to private schools, we can have that discussion. But I think it's going to be a very hard conversation talking about defunding public schools and redirecting that money to private. Although, Frank, just my personal preference, if we're going to be putting more money into the system, there are a lot of places I'd like to see it go before it goes to subsidizing folks who want to send their kids to private schools. And I say that as a person who for some time did send my kids to private schools in the early years. I was a partner at a big law firm making plenty of money, and I chose to pony up to send my kids in their early years to private schools. But never in my dreams would I have said that money should come out of public schools. That was a personal choice I made that I was ready to pay for, but never should that money have come out of public schools. But there are a lot of things, getting back to Speaker Bedke's point, what levers can we push to address some of the problems we're going to be facing and already are facing on third grade reading numbers and what I expect to be off the charts remediation needs. We're still one of 4 states in America that don't provide any public early childhood education. That seems like one of the first places we should be putting money in if we're going to be looking at putting money into the new system before we look at subsidizing families who want to send their kids to private schools. That's something that has a big impact on third grade reading scores, much more than almost anything else we could do. We're one of the states that doesn't put any state money into Head Start. To me, this shocks me. We have over 2,000 families on the wait list for Head Start, which is a program with really proven success rates in improving literacy and just outcomes across the board, reducing criminality. And these are kids that are the most at risk. They're kids that are in the foster care system or have parents in prison or below the poverty line. We have a lot of, I think, really first-line needs in our education system that should be at the front of the line if we're looking at putting new dollars into the education system that I think would go a lot further than putting money toward private schools.
Let's pivot out of education. I know it's a difficult conversation. I know there's all kinds of ideas. It is really important that we look at the immediate aftermath of COVID-19 before we start making major reforms, for sure. On the transportation front, this question is for Speaker Bedke and Minority Leader Stennett. The governor seems on board with using general fund dollars for the transportation funding. What will that look like this year? And what are the implications to other programs, particularly in a COVID year? And Senator Stennett, or actually Speaker Bedke, it's your turn to take the lead.
Well, the governor does seem willing to consider ideas that use general fund money. So I would imagine that we'll build on the programs that we already have that taps the general fund, namely TECM. I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but it addresses congestion and expansion, and I don't know, Matt, you probably came up with the acronym. I can't remember what all it stands for, but one opportunity that is before us right now is the ability to bond, much like we did with the Garvey bonding system. I think that opportunity is available to us now. I think the governor has signaled that he would be willing to at least partially fund that as long as there were a dedicated funding source for bonding. I think that he would go there. I think we're at unprecedentedly low interest rates, and we should take advantage of that. We have infrastructure needs across the state, and particularly in the Treasure Valley, other parts as well. We have bridges that are aging, etc. And I think that we could leverage our dollars now in a bonding system that would allow us to do something that by all accounts I think has been very successful, and that is the Garvey system that we have used. I think we need to be careful how we do that. I assume that right now the 1% of the sales tax revenue goes into that fund. I'm assuming that if we can use one, we can maybe use two. But again, I can hear the concerns that would come from the other side of the aisle and from other spots in the legislature about going into the general fund for infrastructure. But we are in the fastest growing state in the union, and this part of the state is growing faster than any other part, and there are infrastructure requirements that I think that it's folly for us to not address. We haven't talked about a surplus that we have. It's an unprecedentedly high surplus, and maybe one of the better ways to getting that money back to the taxpayers from whence that surplus cometh is to invest in infrastructure. These are investments that are going to have to be made sooner or later. And the more efficiently we can transport people back and forth to work and goods and from market to the marketplace, the better off we'll be. And so I am assuming that we'll go down that road some, and it will probably be in that ever beloved fund called TECM, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Stennett, I mean, bonding is one way to do it. So the Garvey funds were bonding against future federal dollars, and the TECM fund is bonding against, essentially creating a pool to be able to bond against. Our problem in the state isn't just the fact that we need bonding for growth problems, but we have ongoing maintenance issues. Given that the governor has said he's willing to spend out of the general fund, do you see maintenance issues being addressed with general fund dollars?
Well, I hope so. I just spoke to my local highway districts, and they call me the queen of broken bridges, because my district has the most unfit bridges in number than any other district. And that is a public safety issue. I mean, if you're going to have to reroute your school buses in the event they get to a school these days, that's not efficient for commerce, and it isn't safe for anybody. And we have been fighting this. We've gone rounds for years about trying to get local highway districts some money because they're turning them back into dirt. They just can't pave anything anymore. So you're right. Big concern is, I think the last I heard is something around $300 million behind in maintenance, and that is increasing. And so I have always been hesitant to use general fund dollars, but I do if the surplus is as large as we see, understanding the great need for education, healthcare, and corrections, which are also other huge budgetary concerns and needs. If we're willing to do a 60-40 to use some of the surplus to get in and invest in the maintenance of local and state highway districts, I think that would be one of the largest things you can do to keep public safety intact. And so I totally agree that we have to have that earnest discussion. That said, we have to understand that when we talked about raising fees and registration and licensure about 5 or 6 years ago, we promised we'd come back and address the trucking industry, and we never did that. And they're the biggest users and the heaviest users on our highway system. And we did that all to private vehicles and small trucks, but never addressed the rest of the motorized system, which is transportation. It's largely our commercial trucking industry. So when we talk about all the various things that we are going to have to address, it's going to have to be from a lot of different prongs. And with the development, as the speaker mentioned, this is just going to get exacerbated with the growth and more infrastructure put into place. And it isn't just transportation. It's going to be roads and sewers and healthcare, and it's not only the antiquated systems, but the new systems put in. So how do we talk about an equitable, fair plan where we're actually imposing some impact fees or user fees or something for that growth, instead of those of us who are living here taking on the insurgence of people coming in to work to put pressure on these systems, which would be further exacerbate the private property owners who are already paying way too much in their taxes in order for any of this to work.
You know, we're just about out of time. I do have one question, and not everybody has to answer it, but Medicaid was something the voters approved. And then we rolled into a pandemic, and now we are seeing overages in our Medicaid uses far more than the Milliman study found. What is the legislature going to do to ensure that people continue to have access to health care during this pandemic in particular? But how are you going to pay for this year, and what's the plan? Let me start with Pro Tem Winder. I'm going to have you go, and then I'll go to Representative Rubel, and we'll call it a night.
Okay, I quickly, they're basically relying upon cost containment to reduce the costs, as I understand it. But I think it's also going to take some additional state funds to go directly into it to help with, you know, there are a lot more people in the system than they thought there would be. The costs have gone up, but the federal government has increased their percentage of match, so that offsets some of it and gives some savings. But to me, I think they're looking at, you know, those kind of things. I haven't heard of anything beyond that.
Great. Anything to add, Representative Rubel?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think the money is there. I think, you know, even the state's portion of the overage is a tiny fraction of the surplus that we have this year. So I think we can comfortably cover it. You know, personally, the way things played out, well, it's unfortunate that we've exceeded what was projected by the Milliman study. I am incredibly more grateful than ever that we did pass Medicaid expansion, because the overages are because a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people fell into poverty, and a lot of people got sick and faced costly emergency medical needs. And can you imagine if we didn't provide this coverage for all these people that are getting desperately sick and are unemployed? What, you know, we would have lost all of our rural hospitals. They all would have gone out of business, and we would have had a much more dire human crisis than we have right now. So I'm grateful we did it, and we have the means to cover it. We don't have a budget crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. So I think that's what we should be addressing, and we're in a position to do so.
Well, to the four of you, I want to thank you. I know you all probably could have used much more time to talk, and I was using my mouse to help let you know where we were in terms of time. Mr. Speaker, I think a transportation trust fund is a brilliant idea. It needs to happen to pay for ongoing road maintenance. But again, thank you all very much. And we look forward to having maybe a post-legislative update from you all, and we'll see you all to those on the other side. Thank you to Optum and Brightbank for sponsoring this and for helping to make this happen. And of course, to our media partners, the Idaho Statesman and Idaho Ed News. Without our sponsors and without our media partners, we're not able to get this information out to the public and share our leaders' views on where the state of Idaho is headed. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you on the other side.